All right, we are back talking about total drama. And in this video, I'll be ranking all the final boots in the history of total drama. Now, this should be a quicker process than the winner ranking, which I already made a video of, as there's only one final boot from each season, no matter what version of the show you're watching. Now, I realize that on total drama, there's some debate over who is the final boot, as on Action and All Stars, there's a double elimination at the final four round or an ejection in some cases. But for this video, I'm just going to be classifying whoever finished in third as the final boot. So that's what I'm going to be basing this list off of. And like my finalist ranking video, I'll be ranking these players based on the games that they played on their season in which they were a final boot. So with that said, let's get right into the list. So kicking off the list at number 6, the worst final boot in total drama should be pretty obvious if you've seen my finalist video. But at number 6, we have the final boot of total drama action. We have Owen. Now, again, this is the first instance of someone being eliminated the same night as the fourth place finisher. In this case, Courtney. And for this list, I'm considering Owen to be the final boot, as Courtney was formally voted out in fourth place, only for him to be ejected as he's entering the limousine. And he's at the bottom because he was voted out and came back into the game. Now, you can argue his elimination wasn't fair, or as only Courtney's vote counted, but let's back up a bit. Starts off the game in a relatively good position, with Trent picking him to be on the Killer Grits because he's a former finalist, considering that in many circumstances on Survivor or Big Brother, former finalists can enter the game with big targets on their back. I consider that a plus. Furthermore, he's there with Beth and Lindsay, two people he had a decent relationship with. Early on, he accidentally gives Trent the idea to start throwing challenges as a way of impressing Gwen. He survives a lot of these early votes, but I wouldn't say he's in a lot of control. I would give that more to Justin. But then we get to his first vote out in episode 13, where Courtney re-enters the game. Now, I know people will say that Owen got screwed over, as Courtney's vote was the only one that counted, and she chose to eliminate Owen due to his poor challenge performance. With that said, this still isn't great. For one, his challenge performance caused him to become Courtney's target in the first place, which is never a good sign. But the bigger knock is that everyone voted for Courtney, even after being told that Courtney was immune. So while you can claim that Owen was screwed over because he was eliminated with one vote, the reason that was the case was that everyone else, including Owen, chose to throw their votes away onto Courtney. But even if we ignore Courtney re entering the game, I don't think Owen's position was that good at that point in the game. While I feel like he started off the game in a relatively good position, I feel like it was starting to weaken with Lindsay and Beth becoming a tight duo and Justin being sort of the strategic mastermind there. Now, it's possible he could have survived one more vote, as we saw signs of Justin's influence with the two girls wavering. But for all we know, Justin could have convinced them that to vote out Owen anyway at the next vote. I doubt Owen would have tried that hard to undercut Justin or try to break up Lindsay and Beth. And one could even argue that Justin did just that in the real life scenario by throwing away his vote onto Courtney, and everyone else doing it as well. So no matter how you slice it, Owen was not in a good position strategically by the time he went home, Courtney or no Courtney, and probably wouldn't have gone towards the end regardless. But then he re-enters the game at the final six in order to be a mole. Obviously, Owen does a pretty bad job at sabotaging, where we see him helping people in challenges rather than hurting them. Now, he does do some things right, like waste his vote on the Lindsay round, to where had he voted for Duncan, it wouldn't have mattered if Lindsay voted for herself or not. Next round, Harold picks up on him being a mole, prompting Owen to vote him out. And then after that, he votes out Courtney, only to be ejected that same night due to being bad at being a mole. So, on the whole, we have a pretty bad game here. Even ignoring the circumstances of his first elimination, I feel like he would have been in danger the next few rounds regardless. Some of that can be attributed to his status as a former finalist, but even then, he does almost nothing to actively better his position, a problem I feel Owen has in general. So, really, he has to be at the bottom of this list, both because he was voted out and because I don't think he played that active of a game to begin with. So, I have Owen here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and I'll admit this is a bit of an unconventional pick. I wasn't expecting this person to be second from the bottom when I started putting this list together, but then I just thought about it more and more, and I'll admit that this person wasn't in as much danger as someone we'll be talking about a little later, but I we'll talk in a sec about why I don't find her game that impressive. And number five, we have the final boot of total drama, Pakato Island. We have Sugar. Now, again, I mean, if you look at her just on paper, she isn't technically in that much danger. She only attends two elimination ceremonies in the pre-merge, and she wins immunity, gets propelled to the final four. But again, just looking at her game and what she did to get there, I don't think it's that particularly impressive. Early on, she's kind of on the outs, and she gets in fights with a lot of people. She gets in fights with Topher, and she gets in fights with Ella. Her closest ally is Leonard of all people, and he's voted out second. Was completely on the outs during that vote. And as I mentioned earlier, she develops a dislike towards Ella, despite Ella wanting to work with her and willing to do stuff to earn her forgiveness. But Sugar just shoots her down at every opportunity, even trying to get Ella ejected from the game once Chris gets fed up with her singing. So I don't find any of that particularly great. I would say her first actively strategic move comes when she tries driving a wedge between Dave and Sky, who appear to be relatively close at this stage. She tries forming an alliance with Sean to counter this, but is unsuccessful there. When Max joins her team before the merge, she grows a liking towards him, but ends up annoying him by the end of it. That's not great. Um, like I said, there's not much to say about her pre-merge. Like she annoys a lot of people and is mostly unsuccessful in enacting her plans. But the reason she isn't targeted sooner is because they only attend two pre-elimination ceremonies in the pre-merge, so there isn't really that much opportunity for her to get targeted. Whereas I feel like if she had been losing more challenges and attending more elimination ceremonies, it would have only been a matter of time before she would have gotten targeted. So I don't give her that much credit for surviving to that point. At the merge, Sky finally admits to Dave that she doesn't like him, and Sugar uses his opportunity to turn Dave against Sky. This in turn contributes to Dave losing his mind and getting himself eliminated. After that is the Max and Scarlet stuff, not much to say there. And again, through all this, she's propelled to the final four. And again, she didn't do much to get there, or at least not much from a strategic perspective. She pretty much gets to this point in the game by winning most of the pre-merge challenges. She wins immunity at the merge, and then with the Max and Scarlet stuff, she's pretty much catapulted to this position. But anyway, we get to the final four. You know, like she forms an alliance with Sky as a way to target Sean and Jasmine. I mean, those two are a clear duo by that point, and it makes sense for her to do that. But then once she learns about the format where the loser of the final four challenge is automatically eliminated, she decides to throw Sky under the bus. Now again, Sugar is in the worst position coming into the final four and should be playing actively. However, I feel like targeting Sky probably wasn't the best option there. I feel like it would have been in her best interest to try and get out either Sean or Jasmine to increase her odds of getting to the end. Now, again, Sky is also someone that wouldn't have taken her to the end, so maybe she would have needed to try to get out Sean, but again, she doesn't end up doing the optimal move. Now it ends up working out for her as Jasmine is the one to lose the challenge, gets eliminated. But again, it's not an optimal move. And then at the final three, like there's a similar format. Like she loses the challenge and is eliminated as a result. So really, looking at her game, I mean, yeah, she's able to survive all the way to the final three. But again, when you consider the fact that her team won so many challenges in the pre-merge, that she won immunity at the first challenge of the merge, the Max and Scarlet stuff allows her to move up two spots without really doing anything. And then the rest of the game is decided solely by challenges. I mean, I don't think that's super impressive. I feel like based on her way of getting into fights with people and her not really doing stuff in her best interest, I feel like had she attended more elimination ceremonies where she was vulnerable to go up, I feel like she would have been targeted earlier on. So looking at that, I don't think her game is that impressive. I think she does certain things wrong, like the fact that she gets into fights with people and burns bridges along the way. I don't think that's particularly good gameplay. So I'm surprised to say this, but I feel like that none of that is particularly that impressive to me. So I have to put her here at number five. Now we're moving on to number four, and we have the person that I was expecting to be second from the bottom, but then after reassessing their game, I decided to put them a little bit higher, and that is the original final boot of Total Drama. We have Heather. Now, obviously, Heather was a major force on Island, with her being the show's first villain and hourly strategic player, but that doesn't mean she played a good game. I mean, right away, she gets into confrontations with a lot of her team, especially with Lashana. None of that is particularly great. Then in episode 3, she forms the show's first alliance with Lindsay and Beth, who are decently loyal to her. When the Screaming Gophers finally lose a challenge, there's an easy target on Noah. However, by the second time they go to the marshmallow ceremony, she's already being targeted. A lot of that is from her needlessly reading Gwen's diary during the talent show, but she's in the bottom too. Now, to her credit, she gets Izzy and Owen on her side to take out Justin, so I guess you can give her credit there. But from that point on, she is a prime target for pretty much the rest of the game. In episode 8, she almost loses Lindsay, only for Izzy to leave the game. In episode 9, Beth turns on her after treating her horribly, and if Cody hadn't been injured, Heather would have gone home there. And in episode 10, she further irritates her team by being the leader in the cooking challenge to the point where they lock her in the freezer. While she isn't the main reason her team loses that challenge, I would attribute that more to Owen. She definitely didn't help. And realistically, she should have been voted out there as well, only for the Screaming Gophers to be a bunch of idiots and think that Beth's Tiki idol cursed them. And then the next three immunity challenges propelling her to the merge. Again, not too much to say there. So essentially, Heather was in the bottom two in 3 of the 5 marshmallow ceremonies she attends pre merge, and her most loyal ally, Lindsay, being in that spot the other 2 times, where she realistically could have and probably should have been voted out at any one of those chances. And considering she was on the more successful team, she was lucky to have not attended more marshmallow ceremonies than she did. But then we get to the merge, where she is once again a prime target, only to be spared by immunity wins or there being bigger fish to fry. Where at the merge, she's in the bottom two yet again, is spared as Evo is a bigger pariah than her. Then the round after that is where she drives a wedge between Trent and Gwen. Now, while I can give her some credit for manipulating Trent into thinking Gwen didn't like him, this move also puts a massive target on Heather's back, as we see Lashana lead the charge against her. She would have gone home there, except she wins immunity, entirely through luck, mind you. So at the end of the day, that's another black mark. The round after that, we see the women being divided, with Bridget as kind of a swing vote. Now, we've seen Bridget side more with the Gwen and Lashana side of things, which isn't great, but it's also around this point where even Lindsay is starting to question her allegiance to Heather. None of that matters though, as Heather wins immunity yet again, and Bridget is sniped out by the Guys Alliance. The round after that is incredibly wonky, as has an automatic elimination component to it. It's through this that Heather wins immunity, but Lindsay is eliminated for some reason. Now you could say that this was another situation where Heather needed immunity to save herself, and technically she did, but I won't hold it that much against her, as apparently she could have saved herself simply by wiping out on the course. After that, Heather doesn't win immunity, but DJ is eliminated instead. Now, the show never makes it clear whether there was actually a vote in the situation or if Chris decided DJ was unbecoming of a competitor. I mean, if there was a vote, then you could potentially give Heather some credit for getting the votes off her. However, it's never made entirely clear. After that, no one has immunity, and you think that would be a time to get rid of Heather, except Izzy is a bigger pariah. Not a similar thing happens afterwards, where no one has immunity again, but everyone agrees that Jeff is a bigger social threat. But then there's the final 5, where you eliminate players all have a chance to vote out the next person. And this should have been the death sentence for Heather there, except they all screw it up and vote out Lashana instead. So Heather gets another lucky break there. At the final 4, she wins joint immunity with Gwen, and at the final 3, she's eliminated after losing the challenge. So, looking at Heather's game, I feel like it was very mediocre. Plenty could be said about her multiple instances of bad social play, like her sense of entitlement, her unnecessary confrontations, and her poor management of her allies, Beth and Lindsay. And I feel like all those things contributed to her being as big of a target as she was throughout the season, which required her to need immunity or other lucky breaks to get her through the game. While she formed a core alliance with Beth and Lindsay, we don't see her do a ton of branching out to gather votes, with the exception of the Justin vote. Now, I know there could be defenses out there for how she survived certain situations, like the round Beth went home. One could argue that, assuming all these players were thinking strategically, they were keeping Heather around either as a goat or a meat shield. And while I won't deny there was some of that going on, even if we didn't hear about it on screen, you can't deny there were other points in the game where she 100% goes home without immunity or other weird circumstances. The Trent and Lashana rounds come to my mind. Beyond that, she lets go of her allies, Beth and Lindsay, for seemingly no reason, causing her to become a wolf later in the game. So, no, I don't think she played that good of a game at all. While I do give her credit for some things, I mean, she is the definition of someone that only got as far as she did due to plot armor. But the reason I have her above Sugar is because she at least made certain moves in the game. Like, while, you could debate about the Justin vote, that was at least something she was able to have happen, and she did have the Beth and Lindsay alliance at a point. While she was targeted much more than Sugar, I feel like Heather did more strategically to prevent herself from getting voted out, even if I feel like she got very lucky at points. So again, it was relatively close between Sugar and Heather, but I decided to have Heather slightly higher at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and I feel like the rest of this list is kind of a different tier. The last 3 final boots we talked about were all kind of in this bottom tier, but I feel like the top 3 we'll be talking about are all a bit better, even if you feel like they have certain flaws, and it's just a matter of determining who has bigger flaws than whom. So at number 3, we have the final boot I feel like has the biggest flaw with their game, and that is the final boot of Total Drama World Tour. We have Cody. Now, I feel like Cody played a good game, but there's one major issue that we'll be talking about a bit later. He starts off in Team Amazon where he's kind of an outcast, given that he's the only man and a lot of his teammates don't particularly like him. The one obvious exception to this is Sierra, who's fiercely loyal to him. Through that, he's in an alright position there to where Heather would have been the obvious first boot, and Sierra is someone that would have taken bullets to keep him around. Even so, I feel like Cody takes Sierra for granted, even to the point where in episode 8 he attempts to vote out Sierra, which understandably makes her upset. Now, some of this is Sierra's fault too, to where she's obsessive over Cody to where he feels uncomfortable, but from strictly a strategic perspective, trying to vote out Sierra this early is a massive mistake. But really, a lot of his pre-merge is pretty stagnant as Amazon wins most of the immunity challenges, allowing him to remain in this decent position. Once a love triangle situation happens, he's the clear person on Gwen's side of things and even plans to vote out Courtney at the next opportunity. Now, that doesn't end up happening, as during the Australia episode, Duncan injures him, causing Cody to be disoriented in the voting booth. That causes a tie with Gwen and Courtney, which Gwen ends up losing. Some of that is Cody's own fault, as the reason Duncan injures him is because of Cody harassing him throughout the episode due to a love triangle situation. But in any case, losing Gwen before the merge isn't ideal. Once the merge comes, he's never really in danger as the more blatant threats like Owen, Courtney, and Duncan are taken out in quick succession. Through that, Cody enters the Final Four in a fantastic position where, as long as Alejandro doesn't win out, he's almost guaranteed Final Two, as Sierra more than likely gives up her game to allow Cody to advance, assuming Heather wins Final Three immunity. And if he gets to the Final Two with Sierra, she more than likely gives up her game to let him win. And considering Alejandro loses Final Four immunity and was supposed to be voted out there, Cody was about to better his position even further. But then Sierra messes it up for both of them by blowing up the plane and getting herself ejected. Now, to be fair, even after all that, Cody still probably gets to the final two if it were decided by a traditional vote out. Heather, by that point, was determined to defeat Alejandro at any cost, and Alejandro, upon learning that Heather tried to vote him out at the final four, probably would have tried to do the same and take Cody to the end as well. But that wasn't the format. It was decided by a challenge, and Cody lost, despite getting Sarah's help along the way, causing him to go out in third. So I think Cody played all right for the most part. He was in a decent position for a lot of the game, much of which came from Sierra's loyalty to him from day one. He was never in the bottom two at any point. In fact, from what we saw, he only got one vote against him the entire season, and that didn't come until the final four. And while he was spared from attending elimination ceremonies for most of the pre merge, he was benefited by there being bigger targets like Heather and Sierra. Now for the negatives. I think the biggest negative for him, and really the reason why he's below the other people, is his handling of Sierra. Now, like I said, Sierra deserves blame for letting her obsession get on his nerves. But the fact that he tries to get rid of Sierra numerous times throughout the season is a knock, as she's his biggest asset for getting to the end and winning. Strategically speaking, it's in his best interest to keep Sierra around as long as possible. The next knock is failing to vote out Courtney in the Australia episode. While there might have been some benefit to keeping both Courtney and Duncan around to generate conflict and pose as a distraction, Courtney staying in the game allowed Alejandro to rope her in to his influence, contributing to Alejandro dominating the game. And another thing is, I feel like Gwen got most of the heat for the love triangle situation, so keeping her around would have been a more effective lightning rod if that was his strategy. As I alluded to earlier, Alejandro was the only person in the endgame that wouldn't have taken Cody to the final two. And finally, I feel like he wasn't super active in the game. While I would consider him more active than Owen from Island, another person that benefited from great positioning despite not doing much to get himself into that position, the issues I just mentioned stem from a lack of foresight in Cody's end. Not that he didn't do things, but still, it's not particularly great. So on the whole, I think there are both strengths and weaknesses to Cody's game. Like I said, his biggest strength is his positioning and the fact that he was never targeted. But again, the weakness is that he just didn't have the strategic foresight to do what was in his best interest at all times. So because of that, I decided to leave Cody here at number three. Now we're moving on to number two, and this is someone who I did debate alongside Cody, as I feel like that these two people are on the same level or a similar level. But I decided to have this person a bit higher, as I feel like they are more active strategically in the game. And I feel like while they had one really bad round, I don't fault that as much as I do Cody with trying to get rid of Sierra all the time. But at number two, we have the final boot of Total Drama All Stars. We have Scott. Now, again, I feel like Scott played a relatively good game for the most part. He's put on the villains team where he's able to tone down his more blatant manipulative nature. In episode 2, he's the one that accidentally unleashes Mal after hitting Mike in the head with a shovel. He does volunteer twice to be sent to Boney Island, thinking he can find an idol there, only to come up empty handed. Now, while that's something that could have gotten him targeted, especially since he was the one to find the idol in Revenge of the Island, he's able to stay in the majority for the most of the pre-merge, checking out easy targets and Lightning and Joe. Along the way, he starts getting closer to Courtney to the point where they even form a relationship, and I would say that helps better his position, as unlike shows like Survivor or Big Brother, showmances aren't viewed nearly as threatening here. However, he's easily tricked into thinking she was kissing Cameron when it was so obviously an accident. Even so, they're able to get back together, and he really rides into the post merge, not getting targeted. But then we get to episode 11, where Mal exposes Courtney's endgame plan, which obviously blows up Courtney's position. Like everyone else, Scott is also mad about this plan, even though it's actually very good for him. Because Courtney's plan was to take Scott to the final two, thinking he would throw the final challenge to her. That is a fantastic position to be in, not only because he has someone that would take him to the end, but that person would feel complacent in the final challenge, completely underestimating him. So Scott letting the idea of him handing Courtney as a win is a massive misstep. He fights hard to win the next challenge to eliminate Courtney, which is bad. And he also upsets Courtney to where she targets him as a self preservation move. So, from every angle, this is a terrible round for him, with the plan not only getting exposed, though it's not his fault technically, with him failing to realize the strategic benefit this plan would have given him, and him upsetting Courtney to the point where she targets him. That right there demonstrates why him fighting hard to win the challenge to eliminate Courtney was not strategic, as if it was, he would have communicated to Courtney that he needed to make it seem like he was distancing himself from her. So none of that is particularly good. After that, he does try to rebound, where Gwen offers him an alliance to counteract Mike. However, Mike talks him out of it, another bad look. And while he tries to warn Zoe about Mal, he's able to convince her to keep him voting out in third. So really, I think Scott played an all right game for the most part. I feel like he was more active than Cody throughout a lot of the game. Obviously, he's a more strategic player than Cody in many respects. And I feel like the fact that he did form the relationship with Courtney to help him get further in the game is a plus on this end. The problem though is his end game, where I feel like that round where Mike exposes Courtney's plan was pretty terrible, both in his handling of it and the optics of it all. Like, I feel like that was pretty bad for him. Like, I guess you could say that there was nothing he could really do to save Courtney after that point, as people were going to be targeting them regardless. But still, like, the fact that he takes that so emotionally is not good on his end. And also the fact that Mike is able to manipulate him into not aligning with Gwen, and of course, not being able to convince Zoe to keep him at the end. So, really, I don't think his endgame was particularly that good, which made me debate over whether to have him below Cody. But the reason I have him above Cody is because while I feel like he did screw up things in the end game, I feel like those mistakes weren't as big as Cody's, where Cody's big mistake was trying to get rid of Sierra at multiple opportunities. And that's bad for him because, one, it's not in his best interest to do so, and the fact that he keeps failing to do so, like, as there are obviously bigger fish to fry throughout that game. So I feel like Cody isn't as respectable in that regard, as he kept trying to do the same thing that wasn't even in his best interest and kept failing to do so. Whereas Scott, I mean, yeah, he does screw up at the end, but I feel like the stuff that he did before that and the level of agency he demonstrated before that point was good enough to place him above Cody here. So I have him here at number two. Now we're moving on to number one. The best final boot in Total Drama for me is the final boot of Total Drama Revenge of the Island. We have Zoe. Now, again, I feel like Zoe played a pretty good game for the most part, and I feel like her game is the least flawed out of anyone on this list. But early on, she's placed in the Mutant Maggots, which is the more successful team in challenges. She only attends one elimination ceremony the entire pre merge. Along the way, she builds a close bond with Mike while also roping in Cameron. But really, we see her connect with most of the team, with the exception of Anne Maria, but that doesn't matter too much. She starts interacting with Scott, and the two of them form an alliance as well. He tells her about his immunity idol, and she votes with him when they finally go to an elimination ceremony. Scott plays his idol, and the two of them vote out Dakota. Coming into the merge, she's kind of in a good position to where she has a good relationship with Scott, while theoretically having her alliance with Mike and Cameron. But the merge episode is also where she really hits a rough patch with Mike, with him not wanting her to know about his multiple personality disorder. While that rough patch is eventually cleared up, Scott wins immunity in the sole vote at the next elimination ceremony, which he uses to send out Mike. Now, I can give Zoe some credit to where she had a good enough relationship with Scott to not be targeted. Losing Mike is particularly bad as he was a key ally for her moving forward. After this, Zoe distances herself from Scott and goes all in with Cameron, but through that, she also becomes Scott's target moving forward. This leads us to the really wonky final five round where her and Scott vote for each other, Lightning and Joe vote for each other, and Cameron is essentially the deciding vote there. While Cameron obviously votes to save Zoe, that isn't a particular ideal, as any one person could have switched over or gotten over their feud to try to take out Zoe, so she was a little vulnerable there. At the final four, they finally vote out Scott, and coming into the final three, Zoe was in a position to get to the end as long as Lightning didn't win immunity, as her and Cameron would have taken each other to the end. But Lightning does win immunity, and she's voted out as Lightning sees her as the bigger threat to win the game. The fact that she had the alliance with Mike and Cameron while also having Scott trust her at points is very good for her game, and really, like I said, I feel like Zoe played a good game on the season. She was in the majority for most of the season, and I feel like she was one of the better positioned people, even within her trio of Mike and Cameron. She has a really good pre merge. But then starting from the post merge, her game slowly unravels to where she loses Mike, loses Scott's trust, and becomes a bigger target over time. And again, by the end, she's just a bigger threat, at least in Lightning's eyes. But even then, like, if Cameron had won immunity, he would have taken her to the end as well. So I really don't fault her that much either. It's kind of insane that I have Zoe this high on my final boot war ranking, as I feel like, again, like, even now, like, I don't think her game was perfect. I just pointed out a number of different flaws with her game. But I feel like compared to the rest of the field, her game was definitely the least flawed, and definitely the reason that I have her as the best final boot in the history of Total Drama. There we go. That will do it for this video of ranking all the final boots in Total Drama history. I have enjoyed making videos about Total Drama. I have more ideas for Total Drama videos, but I also have videos for Survivor and other shows that I like watching. So stay tuned for those. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. I really enjoy making this content. But for now, that will do it for this video. See ya.